do you hate humans or do you hate people? Or, what about human rights? No one's saying, they should be able to vote. No one's saying they should be able to get a driver's license. No one's saying, give them a degree. Leah, thank you so much for having the time to come and chat. I just want to understand more about your party, the Animal Justice Party, and can you tell me a little bit about what you guys stand for?
Yep, so Animal Justice Party was formed around 2009, 2010 was when we were first registered. I think it was in New South Wales initially. And it was in response to sort of discontent amongst people who cared about animal rights with the other parties. I've often said, when people have sort of said to me, how do you guys differ from the Greens or Labor or other progressive parties? And the key thing I say is that I think all of them have quite a blind spot when it comes to animal rights. And if they hadn't had that blind spot and had done a better job on representing, the rights of all sentient beings to be treated with kindness, the Animal Justice Party may never have been brought into existence. So that's what really created it in the beginning. Is there, a lot of Australians, whenever surveys are done, it shows that vast majority of people think that animals shouldn't be treated with cruelty, that they should be treated with kindness, that abuse to animals is unacceptable. So it's not really a fringe issue, yet there were no voices before our party existed in the parliament bringing those things up. Now and then you would get one politician who might be particularly passionate about, live export or something like that topical, who might champion it in parliament, but it was few and far between. And I remember reading that, it's something like 80% of legislation, possibly more, directly affects animals. And to have no one in the parliament saying, well, how does it affect animals? Is that fair? Is that right? I think is just not fair. And, when some people say, oh, you're a single issue party, the point I try to make is that I would consider us more of a single ideology party, like all parties. And our ideology is based on our core values, which are kindness, equality, rationality, and non-violence. And we apply those values across the board. So you will find, we have a lot of policies that deal with the environment, that deal with people, and they are, progressive policies based on those values. What differentiates us from other parties is that in addition to taking a kind, principled approach to human beings, we extend that to all living beings, which no other party really does. So that's really where we're at, and trying to improve life for everyone, for people, but also for animals and for the planet we share. And I think we've actually done quite a good job. I know I'm biased, but we already have 2 representatives in the New South Wales Parliament. We have 1 representative in the Victorian Parliament. We have 1 representative in a local council in New South Wales. We have another representative on a local council in Victoria. And all those representatives have been able to do a lot of good, not just for animals, but also for people, which I'm happy to talk a bit more about.
That's a really good point, because I feel like you must get that a lot, the sort of arguments. Do you hate humans or do you hate people? Or, what about human rights? Do you not care about human rights?
Yeah. And I can see why people would say that. They're like, oh, you've got animal in the name. Is that your only focus? And my response is, well, no. And it would be crazy for a political party to only have one focus. You get into parliament, you're representing a diverse group of people in your electorate. It would be doing them a disservice to say, oh, that policy, that legislation doesn't affect animals, so I'm going to abstain. I'm not going to vote on it. That would be, an abrogation of your responsibility to the people who elected you. So we definitely have a focus on animal rights because no one else is doing it, and that's what we bring to the parliament. And I think it's a valuable perspective to bring to the parliament. But by no means is that our only, exclusive focus. Like I said, we come back to those values, and those values don't even mention animals. It's kindness, equality, rationality, and non-violence. And so we apply that across the board to our policies to deal with people, our environmental policies, and of course our policies with animals.
Talking about pet ownership. So many people own pets, or pets are a part of the family. So with the cost of living going up, how can you make vet care more affordable? Or how can the Animal Justice Party help with that?
Yeah, so we're taking to this Victorian state election a policy of ours we're calling VetiCare, which is basically Medicare for animals. We designed it in response to the real crisis in the vet sort of industry or sphere, whatever you want to call it, in Victoria, probably had the same issues that a lot of people have with, access to vets being really difficult, and the expense of, even when you can get in to see them, the expense is huge. And we're also hearing from vets and vet nurses about the incredible pressure in their work. I was talking to a vet the other day who was telling me about the terrible rates of suicide amongst vets. It's a really serious issue, and yet the cost of living is just exacerbating it. So we've developed this policy to kind of combat that, and we see that as doing good things not only for animals, obviously, so they get the care they need, but also for people, to make it more, affordable, and that people who might not have a huge amount of money won't delay getting treatment for their animals or their companion animal. But we'd love to see public vet clinics be introduced across Victoria, and also introduce rebates and bulk billing appointments in private clinics. We've already made a bit of progress on Veticare. So before the current Parliament went into caretaker mode for this election, Andy Medic, who is the Animal Justice Party member already elected in the Victorian Parliament, he put forward a motion calling for the establishment of Veticare, and it passed through the Parliament, which is amazing. If you don't have a specific voice in the Parliament who is raising these issues for companion animals and other animals, it won't necessarily get attention. There's a lot of competition in the Parliament for different interests and different legislation. And if the Animal Justice Party is there, even if something is a good idea and makes sense and helps people as well as animals, it won't necessarily get attention because it's just not high enough on the priority list for other parties. So there's a few examples of this, where I think there is something that is clearly common sense, it's good policy, but no one actions it until you get the Animal Justice Party into Parliament. So a classic example of that people are shocked when I tell them about is that before Andy Medic was elected to the Victorian Parliament, recreational wombat shooting or hunting was legal in parts of Victoria.
I can't believe that.
Yeah. What exists in our legislation that harms animals, it had just sat there, unchallenged. That it's not like everyone else in the Parliament was like, oh, we're very pro wombat hunting. No, we won't have that. When he raised it, it was easy to get support. People said, oh yeah, that's not cool. Let's change that legal loophole as quickly as possible. And so it was changed, which is a fantastic outcome. But you need that rights perspective that extends to all sentient beings before you get those sorts of changes pushed through in the Parliament. And if I can just talk about another example that I'm very proud of, and I think has been a real achievement for the party and for Andy in the Parliament. It's what we've done on family violence. So before Andy Medic was elected to the Victorian Parliament, I think there'd been a real blind spot to the role of pets in family violence situations. And they are often a key player in the situation. They're often the first victim of violence in a family, and they're often used by perpetrators as a tool for manipulation, for control. And we had some research provided to us that showed 1 in 3 women reported delaying leaving a violent relationship for the explicit reason that they were worried about what would happen to their pet.
Wow.
But even though you had people who were championing the rights of family violence survivors in the Parliament, no one was bringing that particular animal perspective to the issue until we were elected into the Parliament. So that's something I'm really proud that Andy was able to champion over the last 4 years.
Yeah, so there's like so many layers to at what point someone would be violent to, a pet.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it links back to our animal cruelty laws. Often it's a lot of people are already aware of this, that if someone is violent to an animal, they often will end up being violent to people as well. So, very strong arguments for stopping cruelty to animals. One is that it shouldn't be cruel to animals. They have intrinsic worth, they can suffer, they shouldn't be subjected to violence. But a second argument that sways some people, if they're not so interested in the animal rights argument, is that if you just let someone walk around, committing cruelty to dogs, cats, rabbits, kangaroos, whoever, that person is learning that violence is acceptable, that this is something they can do with no negative consequences. And that's a really dangerous message for them to be receiving, someone who has those violent tendencies. And you will often hear of it progressing to children, to their partner, to someone on the street, to violence against people as well as animals. So we obviously advocate stronger protections against cruelty to animals. And I think if we strengthen that aspect of our legislation, it would have benefits for nipping these things in the bud, so to speak, so that someone who does something heinous to an animal is picked up, gets the, either is, incarcerated, but also gets support, hopefully, and gets on the radar of, say, mental health support and so on, so that they learn to, deal with these impulses that they have in a way that's not violent.
Yeah, and the other big struggle, of course, is the climate crisis. So for those of us who, don't want worse floods and fires, are you striving for better climate targets, especially the big two parties? What is Animal Justice Party doing about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I'm biased, but I do actually think our climate policy is probably the strongest of any party around at the moment in Australia, for the main reason that, unlike the other parties, we talk about all of the causes of climate change, including animal agriculture. So I think that is a bit of a blind spot for a lot of the other parties. People talk about the elephant in the room. We talk about the cow in the room. Animal agriculture is one of the biggest contributors to climate change, through greenhouse gas emissions, particularly methane, but also through its role in deforestation. And we need to talk about it a bit more and, get it on the radar and, have a mature conversation about how we can decrease this hugely emitting, industry, that also has implications for people's health. We have bodies like WHO and so on saying that, for various reasons, people need to consume less meat. And so that's obviously something we're very on board with, for environmental reasons, for animal welfare reasons, and for human health reasons. It's really helps in. And so Australia's own submission to the 2018 UNFCCC stated that Australia's 28 million cows and 70 million sheep would do more to affect our climate in the next 20 years than all of the gas and coal power stations in Australia combined.
Wow.
So, and on deforestation, another, stat I like to tell people about to really emphasise the huge role that animal ag plays in deforestation is that between 2012 and 2016, of all the land that was cleared in Queensland, more than 91% was cleared to produce pasture area for, livestock. But you started off, asking about targets, especially about climate change. So, I did want to talk about animal agriculture because, it's an important issue and doesn't get enough attention. But in terms of our actual policy, so it's to declare a climate and biodiversity emergency and develop a plan that addresses those emergencies, that includes, a target of reaching net zero emissions by 2035 at the latest, and reducing methane emissions by 30% by 2030. Which is called the Global Methane Pledge, which thankfully the federal government has signed up for, but is something we need to focus at the state and territory level in Australia as well in reducing those methane emissions. We also want to reduce subsidies and start phasing out the industries that are most damaging to the environment. So obviously fossil fuels, but obviously also animal agriculture and intensive factory farming. Sorry if you can hear my kids in the back, they're a bit loud. And yeah, we support a halt on any new fossil fuel projects in Victoria. And the third part of our policy is about, on the flip side of decreasing subsidies and supports to those harmful industries is to increase support for the industries of the future, so clean energy, plant-based agriculture, and obviously support reforestation and preservation of the habitats that we still have. So I don't know if you've heard about the Half Earth project, but this is the idea that we should preserve at least half of Earth's land and sea for nature. And the Animal Justice Party supports that as a sort of tangible way for people to get their head around the kind of scale of conservation and preservation that we need to aim for.
Wow. Yeah. It sounds like you guys are doing both sides, which is like the Greens champion for the environment. They always have champions for the environment, but they don't talk about the cow in the room. And then, you got like the Vic socialists who are all about, being against exploitation, and welfare, but don't talk about, animal ethics and exploitation in the animal agriculture industry. So it sounds like you guys are willing to talk about that while also talking about take away subsidies for fossil fuel companies. And
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's a bit of a no-brainer for us because, our slogan is animals, people, planet, and fossil fuels are bad for all three of those things. So, even if you were just taking a narrow animal rights lens, which we don't, but, even if you did that, you would be against fossil fuel industries because pollution and degradation of the environment is just as bad for animals as it is for people.
Yeah, actually, yeah, we're touching a lot of these questions, which is animal welfare, and talking about how we're such a huge, or Australia's iconic in cattle farming. Do you see that animal welfare, and like you said, people aren't going to give up meat? How do you see animal welfare being so important to addressing the industry and climate change?
The work is cut out for us in decreasing those exemptions and exceptions and saying if you accept that animals are sentient, they're capable of suffering, they're capable of thinking, feeling like we are, then it's totally crazy to then, have exceptions to that guiding principle. We would never accept that for people. You wouldn't say, oh, it's wrong to hurt people, except some types of people. We don't accept that for humans, and our aim is to get to a point where people don't accept that for animals either, and there are much greater protections for farmed animals because at the moment they are more like objects in how free people are to abuse and treat them however they want, rather than the thinking, feeling, sentient beings that they actually are in reality. And it's something that really is horrific for the workers as well. That's something that often, like I was talking about, a lack of transparency. Most people are not aware of what abattoir workers, for example, go through. It's really traumatic work. That it is a job that is so unpleasant to do that employers have to go to developing countries to find people living in absolute poverty who would take any job, to help their family and to earn a buck. That's where they have to go to get workers for this industry. It's so damaging and horrific to work in. That to me said it all. And it has mental health implications. It's like we're talking about, zoonotic diseases. If they're going to jump from animals to people anywhere, they're the kinds of places they do. So those people are on the front line for the risk of catching zoonotic diseases. It's improving what happens in slaughterhouses for to make them less inhumane places, less cruel, is a good thing for people as well as animals. So that's something I try to always keep in mind. People can have, just forget that there are actual humans in those places being expected to do these horrific things to animals, and they rarely get out of that unscathed. So, I don't envy them at all. It would be a truly traumatizing job.
There's many human rights violations that happen in the animal agriculture industry. And people don't even know about or don't even want to discuss. So
yeah, absolutely. So on that go through. So yeah, you're spot on. These things often overlap, and that's why I think it's sensible for a party like ours to have that values base and say we're against exploitation and cruelty to everyone, to humans, to animals, and to the environment as well. That's just the way we approach the world. They're our values. That's what we bring to Parliament. I think that I see, the animal rights movement as another emancipation movement, like, the fights for women's rights, like we were talking about earlier. If you're against discrimination, for me, you're against discrimination. If you're against cruelty to all people, and for me, all living beings. And I am confident that we're moving in the right direction, but that takes time.
Yeah, and yeah, like you said, like you don't need to see non-human animals as equal. You know, no one's saying, you know, they should be able to vote. No one's saying they should be able to get a driver's license. You know, no one's saying, you know, give them a degree. We're just saying, can we just give them the minimal respect possible? I can't remember.
Jeremy Bentham, yeah. So it's the idea that, you know, just because animals don't have the intellectual capacity of humans doesn't mean they are objects. You know, they are still sentient beings. You still, you know, they still have the right to not be treated like an object. You know, if someone smashes up a desk, you know, you've not got a desk anymore, but, you know, no sentient being was hurt. If someone smashes up an animal, it's categorically different to, you know, mistreating an object. And so, yeah, even if you are not saying, oh, you know, they are equal to humans, they definitely have rights and they should be, you know, respected. And, you know, we could do a lot better than we're doing at the moment.
Recently, we had the Melbourne Cup, and I was wondering if I could get your stance on the you know, the animal racing industry. I think it'd be pretty obvious what it is, but if I can get your take, that'd be great.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Well, I think that's where we met was, yeah, the Nut to the Cup event that is also runs at the same time as the Melbourne Cup every year. And when I spoke at that event, I talked about a recent survey that found that 54% of Australians do not support horses being raced for gambling or entertainment purposes, which when I found it when I was researching the issue for that speech, it surprised me. I didn't think it would be as high as 54%. And that's huge, you know, to say that horses shouldn't be raced for entertainment or gambling. That means Nut to the Cup, you know, that means ending races like the Melbourne Cup. And it shows that it's becoming a mainstream view, which you've probably read some of the articles. I think it's getting quite a lot of coverage at the moment, that even before you know, the COVID pandemic hit in 2019, attendance had really slumped for the Melbourne Cup and other horse races. So that trend had already started before COVID. And again, it comes back to transparency. You know, I think the more people realise, oh, horses are dying, and when they stop being profitable, they're sometimes just killed, you know, they're not retired into a green pasture somewhere. Oh, that whipping looks really painful. They, you know, they use tongue ties to hold their tongues down while they race. That looks pretty horrible. The more these things are known by people, the more they reject it and don't support that kind of thing. And I think a lot of people love the glitz and the glamour and the party of it. And as Nut to the Cup shows, you don't have to abuse animals to have glitz and glamour and to have a party. You know, I look forward to a day where instead of the Melbourne Cup, there is some other kind of event that doesn't exploit animals, that gives people an opportunity to, you know, dress up and have a party with their friends. You know, if it didn't involve binge drinking and animal exploitation and, you know, gambling, that would be a bonus, I think. But yeah, so unsurprisingly, the Animal Justice Party opposes animals being exploited in the racing industry. And the particular platform we're taking to this election focuses on ending greyhound racing. You know, that has already ended in the Australian Capital Territory and in other places overseas. Yeah, it's really, its social licence, like horse racing, is on the decline. And we are hopeful that, you know, that will be able to be phased out altogether in Victoria. You know, a huge number of dogs are killed every year because of that industry. It's just, yeah, and even the ones that aren't killed, again, they're being treated more like a commodity, an object, not a loved family member, which is, I think a lot of us would agree, more appropriate for, you know, greyhounds and other dogs. In terms of horse racing, you know, ideally we would like the industry to you know, end one day, but, you know, that may take quite a long time, and we're all about incremental changes that improve life for animals. There's no point just being dogmatic and saying, oh, well, you know, it's all or nothing. We're happy to engage in a conversation about, you know, improving welfare for greyhounds and horses in those industries. And so ending whips, the use of whips in horse racing is a priority for us, the use of tongue ties, and also to end jumps racing altogether, because that is the most deadly form of horse racing. It's ended, I think, yeah, everywhere except Victoria in Australia now has ended jumps racing. South Australia was the one to do it most recently. And, you know, the statistics are just unacceptable of the damage that's done. You know, adding in the extra complexity of the horses jumping as they race just introduces so many more injuries and deaths. So that's the platform that we're taking. We also want to see an industry-wide retirement plan for animals out of these industries. You know, as we've seen with the mass graves of greyhounds that have been discovered in various places, there is no retirement plan. Rescue groups do what they can with racehorses and greyhounds, but a lot of them are just killed out of convenience, which is unacceptable. And going back, sorry?
The numbers are just too high. Like, it's 30,000
exactly.
horses are running and 13,000 horses leave the industry every year. Like, what do you do with 13,000 horses? Like, you know?
Yeah.
But sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt you. I really appreciate that you said you can't be dogmatic, because, like, as I see it, an industry entertaining or making money off entertaining animals, using animals for entertainment, is always going to be exploitation. But unfortunately, you can't, you know, go at that angle, and, you know, you have to, like you said, go stages. Let's take away the whips. Let's take away the tongue ties. Let's take away jump racing. And hopefully, eventually, they'll be like, well, what's left? Like, do we even need horse racing anymore?
Yeah, and I think it's about, what's it called? Is it the Overton window? This idea of what's socially sort of acceptable, and social license is something we talk a lot about in the Animal Justice Party. So I think the social license is decreasing for horse racing. You know, that statistic I gave, that 54% of people, that I'm sure if you had done that survey 10 or 15 years ago, it would have been a lot lower, the number of people who agree that animals shouldn't be used, horses shouldn't be used for entertainment and gambling purposes. And I think that I see, you know, the animal rights movement as another emancipation movement, like, you know, the fights for women's rights, like we were talking about earlier. If you're against discrimination, for me, you're against discrimination. If you're against cruelty, you're against cruelty to all people, you know, and for me, all living beings. And I am confident that we're moving in the right direction, but that takes time. And yeah, I recognise that we are not probably in the next, you know, couple of years going to see an end to something like the Melbourne Cup. But there is a lot of low-hanging fruit of improvements that can be made for animal welfare, like that we were talking about, you know, like ending the use of whips and tongue ties and stuff like that. And we're pragmatic. We're about reducing suffering for animals. We're not going to, what's that expression, you know, let perfect get in the way of good. And, you know, we're happy to engage on anything that will make less suffering for people, so for animals and people for that matter. But, you know, we were talking about subsidies before in terms of fossil fuel and animal agriculture. Well, the horse racing industry in Victoria is also subsidised to the tune of, you know, at least millions of dollars every year. So that is a priority for us, is that it's already losing its social license. A lot of people don't support it. It, you know, encourages binge drinking, gambling, you know, animal exploitation and cruelty. Surely there are better things we could spend, you know, taxpayers' money on in Victoria than subsidising and propping up that industry. I can think of lots of things, you know, even if you weren't even just talking about animal welfare, but, you know, health, education, infrastructure. We've got a lot of other pressing priorities in our state, and we don't need to be propping up that industry.
Yeah, and once again, like you said, binge drinking, you know, gambling addiction, and domestic violence is propped up through the racing industry. So, you know, family domestic violence goes skyrocket when Melbourne Cup happens. So, you know,
it's horrible.
As you said, it's if someone is cruel to animals or enjoys the cruelty to animals, I don't know. That's just a statement. That's just a statement. It can go into, you know, family violence. Yeah.
I
mean, so I guess the focus in your party for protecting the wildlife is also very high. You know, it's not just pets, but how can we help with the wildlife, you know, which isn't always talked about.
From the very beginning, protection for Australia's wildlife and our native icons has been a key sort of platform in our party. And how that translates into this election and our platform is a few proposals. I don't know if you've heard of the Authority to Control Wildlife permit system.
No,
so that's where landowners can apply to get a permit that gives them authority to control wildlife, which means they can shoot wildlife, wombats, kangaroos, swans, wallabies, possums, rosellas, and on the most sort of petty grounds, like to get one of these permits, to say, oh, they're making too much noise that's irritating me. They're eating fruit off the trees, they're digging under my fences. So I need to control them. I need to be able to kill them, and you get these permits and go ahead and do it. It's, again, something that isn't widely known amongst the community, and I think wouldn't have much support if people knew about it. Wombats are beloved by a lot of Victorians, kangaroos, other wildlife. When we know how many we've lost through floods and fires alone, the idea that the government is saying to people, oh, on top of that, we're facing a biodiversity crisis. We've already lost, however many through floods and fires, but, oh, they're digging under your fence. Yeah, sure, here's a permit. You can go and shoot wombats, is unacceptable to me, I think, and probably a lot of other Victorians. On top of that, we have a program called the Kangaroo Harvesting Program in Victoria. So that's about the commercial killing of kangaroos for various purposes to do with their bodies. And it's really hard to put into words how horrific that industry is. Kangaroos aren't farmed. They are wild, free animals living in family mobs who are just, without warning, attacked at night by shooters who don't always have great aim. So, it's a lot of maiming, a lot of injuries, and obviously a lot of joeys left orphaned. And what is done with those joeys, they're not sort of terribly profitable to the industry because they're so small. They're often just bludgeoned to death on the spot, or if they're left, they often starve because joeys are dependent on their mothers for really quite a long time. And the estimates vary quite a lot about how many are killed as like a byproduct of this industry, but it's enormous. And some research has been done by an intern who worked with Andy Medic in the Victorian Parliament. There's a program for interns to work with MPs in Victoria's Parliament, and he did some excellent research that showed the human cost of this industry of killing kangaroos, and it's enormous. People are really traumatised by what's happening to our kangaroos. So, needless to say, we want to abolish the Authority to Control Wildlife permit system that I was talking about before, and the kangaroo harvesting program. If it's actually shown that there is a need to control native animals, first of all, we are a bit sceptical about that need to control. Sometimes it's just convenience. Oh, well, I want to build a housing estate there and there's some kangaroos, so they're in the way, so I need to kill them. Do you need to kill them, or could you perhaps relocate them? Is there another way, if we just make a bit more of an effort, where the kangaroos can keep their lives and you can, do the thing that you want to do? We also support infrastructure like wildlife underpasses under roads, yes. Which again, we've talked a lot about things that are good for people and good for animals. That's a classic one. If you hit a kangaroo or a wombat at 100 kilometres an hour on a freeway or highway, that's not good for you either. People die in these car accidents as well as animals. So underpasses are great. They can keep everyone safe, the animals and drivers on the road as well. And we'd also like to see stricter penalties and harsher penalties for people who harm wildlife. We talked a bit before about the legislation in Victoria to try and prevent cruelty to animals, and the many exceptions and loopholes and weaknesses that it has, and wildlife is in that camp. We need to make it clearer that it is unacceptable to the Victorian community to harm wildlife, and that if someone does that, then there need to be serious repercussions for them. And at the moment, that legislation I don't think is meeting community expectations. Learning more about kangaroos, I think, is really important for growing community sympathy to leaving them alone as much as we can and protecting them.
Yeah. And you just touched on my second last question, which is land back for Indigenous people. And you know, the importance of support for treaty for First Nations people, and where does Animal Justice Party stand with treaty and what we can do to help decolonise and land back?
Yeah, so we're very much in favour of treaty, very happy that it's happening in Victoria, very proud that, you know, it's sort of the first place in Australia where this is really kicking off, and really hopeful that other states and territories will follow suit with what we're doing in Victoria. And, you know, like I said at the start, you know, our values are kindness, equality, rationality and non-violence. So, you know, we apply those across the board, including with First Nations people as well as, you know, other groups. So, yeah, I think that's sort of the answer.
It's amazing. Yeah, I completely agree. And on my final question, knowing that, you know, Animal Justice Party is, you know, growing in some way and there's more candidates now than ever. And,
yeah.
For areas where we don't have an Animal Justice Party and we can't put them at the top of our ballot form, who are you allowed to say who you would advocate for, or who you would say put your second vote for?
So the good news is that in this Victorian election, we are running in every district and every upper house seat. So wherever you are in Victoria, you can vote number one for the Animal Justice Party. And obviously, I would recommend that. You know, I think we've shown over the last 4 years that we can be a really safe pair of hands in Victorian Parliament, be constructive, you know, and bring forward good policies that relate to animals, but also for people and for the environment. And, you know, I think all of our candidates are really impressive people and would do a really good job in the next term of the Parliament. So that's obviously my aim in running and supporting my colleagues to run. I think another reason to put us first is, you know, with the preferential voting system in Victoria, which not everyone understands, it's quite complex, but, you know, if you vote number one for a minor party and they don't sort of make it through the first round of vote counting, they were the lowest and they were knocked out, then your vote is counted again. People look at your second preference and where does that go? And then, you know, that gets stacked back on their pile. So it's actually quite a powerful thing to do to vote for a minor party like the Animal Justice Party, because even if we're knocked out, which we often are, we're a small party, then your vote goes to the next party that you listed. And it goes with a message, you know, that you care about animal rights. So, you know, if you're, just to take an example, maybe your electorate, the ALP usually wins, and maybe you support the ALP and you want them to win, but you're really unhappy with duck shooting and that the Labor government over the last 4 years and longer has refused to end duck shooting in Victoria. If you put the Animal Justice Party first, you know, we will most likely be knocked out early in the process in the counting. It's a bit different in the upper house, but I'm talking about the lower house more at the moment. Then your vote will flow to whoever you put second. And if you put the ALP second, you know, that's where it will stop and they will probably win your seat. But it's not like parties just go, oh, we won the seat. Oh, great, awesome, job done. Let's, you know, forget about the election and move on. We all look at the first preference votes. It tells a really powerful message. You know, it's almost like a survey. Well, it is, you know, of your electorate. And you can say to yourself, you know, oh, the Animal Justice Party did really badly. Oh, great, I don't need to worry about animal issues. Oh, the Greens did really well. Oh, I need to worry about the environment. You know, they look at how the first preference votes were distributed, and that tells them something about their electorate. So if there is a bit of a higher, you know, vote for the Animal Justice Party, you know, they're not idiots. They think to themselves, I'm losing first preference votes to the Animal Justice Party. I don't even want to lose 1% of our votes to the Animal Justice Party. We want to keep people, you know, giving us their first preference vote. What can I do to stop that loss of votes to the Animal Justice Party? I can do a bit better on animals. You know, I can support an end to duck shooting in my party in the government if I'm elected. These sorts of things. And I welcome that. You know, that's part of what we're here to do, is to push other parties to compete with us on animals, to make it a race to the top rather than a race to the bottom in how we treat animals. So, you know, that I think is a good argument for putting the Animal Justice Party first, and then, you know, the party that you traditionally vote for or you usually vote for second, and give them the message that you want some action on improving welfare for animals. And I would also mention that a lot of people, I think these preferences are all sort of locked in stone, but a lot of people don't follow the guidance they're given. You know, they might say, oh, you know, thank you, that's interesting. Interesting to see who you put on your card, and maybe I'll put you first, but I'm not going to follow the rest of what you put. So, you know, I encourage that. You know, I think the more of us who think for ourselves and decide how we want our preferences to flow, the better.
Amazing. Yeah, we'll have to wrap up because it's almost out of time again. But I just want to say,
Yeah.
so Leah, you're saying that there's no way to waste your vote. So wasting your vote isn't a thing.
Yes.
Is that what you're saying? So,
yes, it's a great secret that the major parties don't want you to know.
oh my God, all this time, people tell me don't vote for your minor parties because it's a wasted vote. Oh, yeah. It's such a powerful piece of propaganda that's really, you know, made its way into, you know, mainstream thought. That's really effective.
Yeah, it's a real shame. Yeah, and it's a bit of a failure, I think, of sort of civics education, really. Like, a lot of people don't understand how our electoral systems work, and that's a big problem. That really is not good, given we have compulsory voting. People need to understand what's going on and how their vote works.
Yeah, and it's not the thing of like, oh, you know, such and such is in bed with such and such, and, you know, this party is going to give you a vote to that party. It's like, no, that's not how, you know, our voting system works. Yeah, so it's like you said,
decide it for yourself.
Yeah, combating. I find it's like combating the misinformation or disinformation by a lot of the media is such a struggle. You know, trying to speak out against, you know, the Murdoch media and So yeah, it's like, how do we get this to, you know, mainstream thought? Or I guess it's conversations. I guess conversations is probably the best way, or word of mouth. It's the best way to.
Yeah, and I think education too. You know, I started out my career in teaching, and as a school student myself, and then as a teacher later on, I was always a bit horrified at the lack of education about your role as a citizen and how does voting work, you know, and how do parties work and how do parliaments work. It's skimmed over, or it's sort of not covered really enough. So longer term, I think that's something we could do across Australia, but also in Victoria, to improve people's level of understanding and their confidence as well, because people go, oh, I don't know, I don't understand it, and they feel like it's their fault or they're stupid or something, which is, you know, it's across the board. People are not alone in not understanding this stuff, and they shouldn't be made to feel stupid.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah. Amazing. Thank you so much for your time, Leah. I really appreciate it.
And, my pleasure. No, thank you, Jason.